I was 22 years old when I attended a Halloween party at my former best friend Damien's house. He passed away from a heroin overdose in 2013. Before his death, Damien was known for throwing massive Halloween parties every year. His parents routinely flew to New York each October for their own friends gathering, leaving the house entirely to him. Damien was obsessed with Halloween, going all out with terrifying decorations. Every inch of his home was filled with props that we all knew he had spent way too much money on. He even constructed enormous cardboard walls covered with wallpaper to create an elaborate haunted maze. To keep this story PG-13, I'll skip the alcohol, weed, and everything else and get straight to the part where things turned horrifying. I'll admit, none of us were in our right minds that night. No one ever was at Damien's parties. Everyone who attended knew exactly what went down. That night, Damien, a few of our friends, Vinny, Joey, Quinn, and I, were upstairs in his room, passing around a bong, when two loud, steady bangs echoed from downstairs. Damien, clumsy but clearly panicked, rushed to the door to see what was happening. Almost immediately, we heard screams, both male and female. I remember the sound vividly. It wasn't just people yelling, it was pure terror, the kind of screaming that makes your blood run cold. We shouted at Damien to get back inside and lock the door. Even in our intoxicated state, we understood something was very wrong. He ran in, quickly but quietly locking the door behind him. When he turned to face us, his expression was one of sheer horror, as if he had just witnessed something unspeakable. "What did you see? What's happening?" we all asked at once. "Hide," Damien whispered. That was all he said. We didn't ask questions. We already knew why. Damien killed the lights and hid in the closet with Joey. I scrambled under the bed with Quinn while Vinny climbed into a storage box. Downstairs, the blasting music suddenly stopped. The next sound was a deep, commanding voice. "Everybody, shut up!" A girl let out a terrified scream, followed by another loud bang. Then, silence. The man downstairs started shouting again, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. We heard two more voices, at least 3 intruders, maybe more. Heavy boots stomped up the stairs, pausing outside the bedroom. The doorknob rattled as someone tried to enter. Finding it locked, the intruder threw his shoulder against the door, trying to break in. After several failed attempts, the sound of gunfire shattered the silence. The shots blasted through the doorknob, breaking the lock. The door creaked open. We heard cries from downstairs after the gunshots. Then, silence. Damien and I clamped our hands over our mouths, trying to muffle our breathing. I peered through the thin fabric hanging from under the bed, watching as black boots, paired with torn denim jeans, moved across the room. The intruder instinctively turned toward the closet. I heard the door creak open, followed by Damien's trembling voice. Please don't kill me. I have money. I can get you whatever you want." The intruder didn't respond. Instead, he ordered Damien to come with him. The rest of us stayed hidden. Apparently, Joey hadn't been caught either. We remained under the bed, frozen in fear. Downstairs, there was near silence except for Damien speaking with the intruders. Whatever was being said was too low for us to hear. It felt like an agonizing 20 minutes before the front door suddenly slammed shut. Then, footsteps rushed up the stairs. Damien burst back into the room. "They're gone," he gasped, breathless. I will never forget the horror I felt when I finally stepped downstairs. There, in the living room, lay 2 lifeless bodies, blood pooling beneath them. Jen and Robbie, 2 of our closest friends. I still miss them. The police were more focused on identifying the masked men who had killed 2 innocent college students. Damien later told the 4 of us, those who had hidden in his room, that there were 4 intruders in total. Each one wore a fedora, a vendetta mask, long coats and gloves. They demanded $100,000 in cash, and when Damien couldn't provide it, they ordered him to fill a sack with his most valuable possessions. Everyone being held hostage was forced to throw their wallets into the sack or risk being shot. After the incident, Damien spiraled into a deep depression. He began drinking excessively, eventually becoming an alcoholic. He stopped attending school and ultimately dropped out. It wasn't long before he turned to even harder drugs, meth, and heroin. I only had one real conversation with him after the tragedy. During that talk, he was more honest than I had ever seen him before. Tears streamed down his face as he clutched a pipe in his trembling hands. He admitted that he lived in constant pain, haunted by the deaths of two of his best friends. Less than a year later, in July 2013, Damien died of a heroin overdose. It was my first Halloween living alone, away from my parents. My new house was a small corner home with a basement but no upstairs. My parents had helped pay for part of it. At 11 p.m., I was sitting in the living room, watching a Halloween horror movie marathon. That's when I heard a knock at the door. I hesitated. Who would be knocking this late? Surely, all the trick-or-treaters had gone home. I figured it was some late-night pranksters playing ding-dong ditch. I waited for a moment, then glanced out the window toward the porch. No one was there. Just as I'd thought, some kids messing around. I sat back down, thinking nothing of it. But then it happened again, knocking at the front door. "Get lost," I shouted, annoyed. Whoever it was ignored me. The knocking turned into pounding, loud, forceful. Now I was pissed. I jumped up and flung the door open, ready to catch them in the act. But no one was there. I slipped on my shoes and stepped outside, scanning the yard. No one was hiding behind my car, in the bushes, or across the street. That was it. I wasn't going to entertain their little game any longer. I locked the door, double-checked it, and went to my bedroom, locking that door as well. It was silly, but I wanted to feel safe. Even over the sound of the TV, I could still hear the pounding on my front door. Over and over again. It went on for over 30 minutes. I started to think maybe they were filming some dumb prank for YouTube, trying to get a reaction out of me. I refused to give them one. At some point, I dozed off with the TV on, only to be jolted awake by more knocking. I checked the clock. 2:00 a.m. No way were kids still out pulling pranks at this hour. I turned off the TV and sat up, listening closely. Then, my heart stopped. The knocking wasn't coming from the front door anymore. It was coming from my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed, scanning my room for anything I could use as a weapon. My mind raced. Whoever was out there, they knew I was awake. They were trying the doorknob. They were trying to get in. This wasn't a prank. In a split-second decision, I came up with an idea. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I grabbed my phone, connected it to my speaker system, and pulled up YouTube. My hands shook as I typed in 0.45 gunshot sound effect. I turned the volume to max and pressed play. The sound of a gunshot exploded from the speakers, echoing through the house. It sounded real enough that I prayed it would scare them off. I paused the video after the first shot and shouted, "That was a warning shot. Leave now, or I won't hesitate to put a bullet in your head." Silence. Then I heard the sound of footsteps. 2 pairs, rushing across my wooden floors and out the front door. I waited a moment before slowly unlocking my bedroom door. I peeked outside. They were gone, but my front door was wide open. I rushed to slam it shut, locked it again, and immediately called the police. That's where my story ends. To this day, I don't know who they were, what they wanted, or why they chose my house. But I do know one thing. That gunshot sound effect saved my life. Halloween had always been a lonely night for me. By the time I turned 14, I could no longer use the excuse of tagging along with my mom, and I didn't have friends to go with. My little sister Emily was only 8, so my mom took her trick-or-treating. My only close friend Jake already had plans, and I didn't want to impose. It seemed like I wouldn't be celebrating Halloween that year. Then, my mom asked if I could stay home and hand out candy. A small part of me lit up with excitement. I finally had a job that didn't involve trick-or-treating alone like a loser. She left with Emily around 6 p.m., an hour after she got home from work, telling me she'd be back by 9, and I made myself comfortable on the couch in the living room, watching a scary movie marathon on AMC, while answering the door every so often to give out candy. Then the kitchen phone rang. The ringtone was so loud it made me jump. I picked it up, but the other end was silent, except for faint shuffling noises, like someone fumbling with the phone. "Hello?" I said. Silence. I repeated it 5 times before the caller hung up. I figured it was just some dumb Halloween prank and shrugged it off. For a few minutes, everything seemed normal. I continued watching my movie, answering the door and giving out candy. Then, the phone rang again. Same unknown number. Curious, I picked it up. This time, I heard faint breathing. "All right, Jake, I know it's you," I said, rolling my eyes. The caller immediately hung up. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt uneasy. As the night went on, it got darker outside, and the number of trick-or-treaters dwindled. I was watching Friday the 13th when it happened again. The phone rang. By now, the sound of it sent chills down my spine. I already knew who it was, or rather, I didn't. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Silence. Just the same faint breathing, the shuffling of the phone. Then, after nearly 30 seconds, they finally spoke. A deep, exaggerated voice said, "I'll be paying you a visit tonight." I slammed the phone down and told myself I wasn't answering again. About half an hour later, the house went completely dark. The power had been cut. The lights flickered off. The TV screen went black. I froze. Then, loud, aggressive thumping came from the front door. I completely lost it. I screamed, panic overtaking me. And then, through the silence, I heard laughter. It was familiar. I hesitated before yanking open the door. There stood Jake, doubled over, laughing his head off. Rage surged through me. I shoved him, nearly knocking him down the steps. "So it was you making those dumb phone calls?" I yelled. He nodded, still laughing. But something wasn't right. "That wasn't your voice on the phone," I said, my stomach sinking. Jake looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I didn't say anything. I just called and did the heavy breathing. My heart dropped. If Jake had only breathed into the phone, then who had spoken? A sense of dread washed over me. I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the fuse box outside. My worst fear was confirmed. The box had been opened. All the wires were snipped. We looked at each other, and without another word, we ran. Faster than I had ever run before, back inside the house. I locked the doors, my hands shaking, as I called my mom. She told us to stay inside while she called the police. When they traced the call, it led to a payphone outside a bar. To this day, I don't know if it was just a Halloween prank taken too far, or if someone had planned to break in. And honestly, I don't want to find out. When I was younger, my friends and I went trick-or-treating every year. But one year, something strange happened. As we walked from house to house, we passed a man standing perfectly still on the sidewalk. He wore a mask and held a lantern. As we passed, he slowly turned his entire body to watch us. We laughed it off, but as we moved through the neighborhood, we saw him again and again. No matter where we went, he always seemed to be there, lurking just out of reach. At one point, we thought we had lost him. We knocked on a door, got our candy, and turned back toward the street, only to find him standing in the road, waiting. Fear gripped us. We bolted back to the house, pounding on the door and telling the owners about the strange man. They stepped outside, looking down the street. He was gone. Later that night, an adult family friend told us he had seen the same masked man, but this time the man had been standing behind a tree, whispering to small children and motioning for them to come closer. Only when the family friend threatened to call the police did the man disappear into the night. To this day, I wonder who he was and what he wanted. As we walked from house to house collecting candy, we kept noticing the same masked man following us. It didn't make sense. No matter how slowly we walked, he always seemed to keep up. We hadn't seen him for a while, so we let our guard down. After getting candy from a house, we turned back toward the street, and there he was, standing right in the middle of the road, waiting for us. Panic set in. Without hesitation, we knocked on the door behind us, frantically telling the homeowners about the man. They stepped outside to check, and at that moment, the masked figure casually walked down the street and disappeared from sight. We didn't see him again that night. Later, a family friend told us he had seen a masked man hiding behind a tree, whispering to little kids and motioning them to come closer. He had only backed off when the family friend threatened to call the police. Another Halloween, I was out trick-or-treating with my best friend Dylan. We were both 11 years old, walking across a small wooden bridge over a river that the locals called Black Hollow Creek. As we reached the other side, a black Jeep suddenly pulled up, blocking our path. Our instincts kicked in immediately. Without saying a word, we turned and hurried back across the bridge. The Jeep's windows rolled down, and a man with a raspy smoker's voice called out, "Hey kids, I need help. Can you come here for a second?" Dylan and I kept walking. "Sorry," I shouted back, picking up the pace. The Jeep was too big to cross the narrow bridge, so it turned around and drove down the main road on the opposite side of the river. We thought we were safe, until an SUV came speeding around the corner, screeching to a stop right in front of us. The driver rolled down the window. This time we got a good look at them. There were two passengers in the car. One was an old man with curly gray hair and a thick mustache, his voice just as raspy as the first guy's. "Hey kids," he said with a grin, "hop in. We got free bags of candy for you." Dylan and I didn't respond. We turned and ran. The Jeep from before suddenly reappeared, making a three-point turn to follow us. They were working together. Wherever we ran, the Jeep and SUV tailed us. The two vehicles kept cutting us off, forcing us to dart in different directions. Finally, the Jeep sped ahead, came to a screeching halt, and both front and back doors swung open. Two men stepped out, lunging toward us. Without thinking, we dropped our candy bags and sprinted straight for my house, which was thankfully just down the block. We rang the doorbell over and over, screaming. The men weren't fast runners. They slowed down when they saw where we were headed. By the time my mom opened the door, they were already backing away toward their cars. We pointed frantically at the Jeep as it sped off in the opposite direction. My mom yanked us inside, locked the door, and immediately called the police. She gave them every detail we could remember: the black Jeep, the SUV, the three older men with their gravelly voices. But what scared her most was the fact that these men now knew where we lived. My dad tried to reassure her, but she wouldn't calm down. Eventually, the police sent an unmarked car to park outside our house for 3 hours. That alone made us feel safer, but what really put us at ease was when my dad woke us up around midnight to see the flashing red and blue lights. The police had pulled over an SUV and a black Jeep. 3 men were in handcuffs, the same 3 men who had tried to kidnap us. My dad stepped outside to confirm their identities, and Dylan and I followed, standing in the doorway. We shouted at the men, flipping them off before my mom yanked us back inside and sent us to bed. That night went from the scariest experience of my life to the most satisfying. A few years later, another Halloween took an unexpected turn. I had taken my 7-year-old daughter Ava trick-or-treating for a few hours. When we got home, I made dinner, and we spent the rest of the night watching Halloween movies together. By the time she went to bed, I was exhausted and fell asleep soon after. Not long after, Ava came into my room, tugging at my blanket. "Daddy," she whispered, "there's someone in my closet." I sat up groggily. "Sweetheart, there's no one in your closet. You're safe." She asked to sleep in my bed, but I reassured her again. Reluctantly, she went back to her room. 5 minutes later, she returned. This time, she was shaking. I heard something move. Things are falling over. That's when my heart skipped a beat. I followed her back to her room, flipped on the lights, and jokingly asked, "All right, who's hiding in here?" Silence. Then, a soft thud from inside the closet. The hairs on my arms stood up. "Ava," I said firmly, "go to the neighbors. Now. Tell them to call the police." She hesitated, but ran out of the room. I took a deep breath and swung the closet door open. Sitting inside, crouched over my daughter's toy box, was my neighbor's teenage son, Daniel. Fury exploded inside me. I grabbed him by the collar, yanked him to his feet, and dragged him next door, pounding on his parents' door. They answered, their faces going pale as I shoved him inside. I told them everything. Daniel's father, Mark, slapped him across the face before turning back to me. "Please, let him explain." I listened, rage boiling beneath the surface. He confessed that while Ava and I had been trick-or-treating, he had snuck in through an open window and hid in her closet. He was waiting for the perfect moment to... I don't even want to think about it. The only reason I didn't call the police was because of my long-standing friendship with Mark. But I made one thing very clear. If I ever saw Daniel near my daughter again, I wouldn't hesitate to make him regret it. The next morning, I found a small hole drilled into Ava's closet door. They had been watching her sleep. To this day, I wonder if I made the wrong choice by not getting the police involved. I told Ava that if she came back again, I would walk her to her closet and show her that no one was there. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, she returned. I sighed and asked why she thought someone was in her closet. She hesitated before whispering, "I heard something moving and things falling over." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I walked her back to her room, turned on the lights, and jokingly called out, "Is anybody in there?" We stood in silence, listening. I didn't expect to hear anything. Then, a dull thud from inside the closet. My heart nearly stopped. "Run to the neighbors, call the police," I shouted. Ava bolted out the door as I swung the closet open. Sitting on top of my daughter's toy box was our neighbor's teenage son, Ryan. Fury overtook me. I grabbed him by the collar, yanked him up aggressively, and marched him next door, where Ava was frantically ringing their doorbell. Ryan's father, Greg, opened the door, his face immediately shifting to confusion as I shoved his son inside. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. I told him everything, my voice trembling with rage. I assured him I wouldn't press charges, but if Ryan ever came near my daughter again, there would be consequences. Greg turned to his son, his face contorted with anger. Without hesitation, he slapped Ryan across the face before demanding an explanation. Ava and I went inside as Ryan shamefully admitted the truth. While Ava and I had been out trick-or-treating, he had snuck into our house through an open window and hid in her closet with his friend. Dylan. I felt sick. "Is Dylan still in my house?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Ryan hesitated before nodding. I stormed out, leaving Ava with Greg. As I stepped back into the house, I spotted Dylan immediately. He was crouched near Ava's dresser, holding her underwear in his filthy hands. A blind rage consumed me. I lunged at him, grabbed him by the throat, and threw him to the ground. My fist connected with his face 4 times before I let him scramble to his feet and run. The only reason I didn't call the police was because of my long-standing friendship with Greg. But I made myself crystal clear. If either of them ever so much as looked at my daughter again, they would regret it. That night, Ava slept in my bed, shaking. The next morning, I made a chilling discovery. There was a tiny drill hole in her closet door. They had been watching her sleep. To this day, I regret not calling the cops. I still can, but nothing has happened since. Ava is 13 now, and Ryan has since gone off to college. But the thought of what could have happened still haunts me. The Halloween we moved into our new house was one I'll never forget. Our family had just relocated to a large home in Winston Churchill, Ontario. My parents, 4 sisters, my brother and I spent the entire day unpacking. That night, we were finally settling into our new rooms when my mom called us to finish up chores. I was exhausted. It was 11:30 p.m., way past the trick-or-treating rush. And now, we had to clean. It seemed to take forever, but once I finished, I climbed into bed, eager for sleep. Then, I heard something. Footsteps. They were soft, moving through the upstairs hallway. Annoyed, I sat up. "Who's out there?" I called. Silence. I got up, expecting to find my brother or sister wandering around. But when I checked, no one was there. I rushed downstairs, where my parents and siblings were still unpacking in the basement. "Were any of you just upstairs?" I asked. They all shook their heads. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I forced myself to dismiss it. Just my imagination. Back in my room, I noticed something odd. The temperature had dropped dramatically. I had to grab a sweater just to feel comfortable. I woke up around 12:30 a.m., startled by a loud banging sound. It was coming from my parents' bedroom. At first, I thought one of my siblings needed water and was too scared to go alone. But something felt off. The banging grew louder. I hesitated, debating whether I should check it out. Finally, I tiptoed toward the hallway. The second I stepped outside my room, the banging stopped. I stood frozen, staring at my parents' door. A wave of unease washed over me. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, just as I turned back toward my room, the door creaked open. A shadowed figure stood in the doorway, at least 7 feet tall. I choked back a scream. The figure took a slow step forward, then another. Then, boo. I screamed loud enough to wake the entire house. My parents burst into the hallway, flipping on the lights. My siblings stood behind them, wide-eyed. But the figure? Gone. My heart pounded as I tried to explain what I had seen. The footsteps, the knocking, the shadowed figure that whispered in the dark. My parents exchanged a glance. Then, my dad frowned. "We didn't hear any knocking." His words sent an icy chill through my veins. My siblings stared at me as if I had lost my mind. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. And I know I wasn't imagining it. Even now, I can still see that figure standing in the dark. Watching? Wait. The banging continued, growing louder by the minute. I couldn't sleep. My heart pounded, and my body was frozen with unease. Finally, I decided to check it out. I stepped into the hallway, but no one was there. The noise suddenly stopped. I stared at my parents' bedroom door for a brief moment before deciding to go back to bed. But just as I pulled the covers over me, the banging resumed. This time, it sent a chill deep into my bones. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But the fear wouldn't let me sleep. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, my bedroom door creaked open. It was so quiet, as if someone were gently pushing it with slow, deliberate intent. I bolted upright. "Who the hell is there?" I hissed. "Cut it out. I'm trying to sleep." No response. Very light footsteps began moving closer to my bed. At first, I thought it was one of my sisters playing a joke. But as the steps stopped, I rolled onto my side and saw it. A figure at least 7 feet tall. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. My breath hitched in my throat. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, as the shadowy presence loomed over me. Then, In the most chilling, whispery voice, it said, "Ooh." That's when I lost it. I screamed at the top of my lungs and threw the covers over my head. My parents burst into my room, flicking on the lights. But the figure was gone. I frantically told them everything: the knocking, the footsteps, the towering presence beside my bed. My siblings gathered in the doorway, watching me in stunned silence. I turned to my parents. "Didn't you hear the knocking? It was coming from your door." They exchanged confused glances. "There was no knocking," my dad said. "We didn't hear anything." My blood ran cold. They all stared at me like I had lost my mind. But I know what I saw, what I heard, and I'll never forget it. A few years ago, when I was 20, my friends and I decided to visit a haunted house attraction on Halloween night. It was called the Basement Maze, and it was infamous in our town. It had been open for 4 years, but after that night, it was never heard of again. It wasn't just any haunted house. It was a self-guided maze. No tour guides, no easy exits. The only way out was to find the basement, locate a key, and unlock the exit. A terrifying concept, to say the least. We started in the living room, which was eerily detailed. A giant open coffin sat smack in the middle of the room. Dusty antique furniture, fake cobwebs in every corner, and deep red stains on the wooden floors set the mood. The dining room was even worse. Dim lanterns flickered on the walls, casting long shadows. Actors in grotesque costumes jumped out at us when we least expected it. No matter how much we anticipated it, they got us every time it happened. Every time. Dim lanterns, blabbering. Dim lanterns. The maze was designed to disorient us. We kept looping back into the same rooms, searching for the entrance to the basement. When we finally found the basement door, we hesitated. It was pitch black down there. "We sure this is part of the maze?" Matt asked nervously. I wasn't so sure anymore. There were no actors down here. No eerie music, no flickering lights, just pure, suffocating darkness. We weren't allowed to use our phones for light. The only choice we had was to step down blindly into the abyss. As we descended, every step creaked under our weight. The sound was painful, like nails on a chalkboard. We started nervously laughing, trying to ease the tension. Then, I walked into someone. "Crap, sorry," I muttered. Silence. I expected one of my friends to respond, but no one did. A moment later, I felt a hand rest gently on my shoulder. My stomach dropped. I took off running, nearly knocking over one of my friends. "Someone's in here with us," I yelled. Panic spread through the group. By sheer luck, Adam found a key on an old wooden desk in the corner. We bolted upstairs, breathless, back into the dimly lit safety of the house. We spotted the exit door and saw a small bin labeled, "Drop keys here." Quickly, we tossed the key inside and left the haunted house. At first, we laughed it off. The fear was gone. Until the exit door swung open. A tall figure emerged, wearing a bloodied pig mask and a long black coat. At first, we thought he was an employee. But as we walked further, he followed, and followed, and followed. "Dude, we don't have the key," Jake called over his shoulder. "We put it in the bin." The figure didn't stop. As a joke, we ran. So did he. We stopped. So did he. The laughter died in our throats. By the time we reached Eddie's house, the masked figure was still behind us. "I'm not leading him to my house," Eddie muttered. "We're going through the backyard." We slipped through the gate, slamming it shut behind us. Silence. Then, the gate creaked open. The pig-masked figure stepped through, walking faster this time. Eddie didn't hesitate. "Dad, get your gun." At that, the figure froze. Eddie's dad stormed out, gun in hand, ready to shoot. The masked figure slowly raised his hands. His voice shook. "D, don't shoot. I swear, I'm only 27. Eddie's dad growled, "Get lost." Now, the man bolted. The next day, we called the haunted house attraction. They told us something that chilled us to the bone. They had no employee wearing a pig mask. Whoever I had just bumped into placed a hand on my shoulder. A cold, firm grip. I didn't wait to find out who it was. I took off running, screaming, while simultaneously laughing, my heart pounding. There was something deeply disturbing about standing in that pitch-black basement, knowing someone was in there with us. Luckily, my friend Marcus found a key on an old wooden desk in the corner of the room. "Got it!" he yelled. We didn't hesitate. We sprinted upstairs, bursting back into the dimly lit safety of the house. The relief of escaping that claustrophobic abyss was short-lived. We still had to find the exit. After what felt like an eternity of navigating the maze, we spotted the door. A sign above it read, "Exit. Use key to leave." We jammed the key into the lock and pushed the door open. The moment we stepped out into the cool night air, I exhaled, finally feeling safe. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. Right outside the exit stood a small collection bin with a sign that read, "Drop keys here, please." That's how the haunted house staff collected the keys and reset them in the basement for the next group. We tossed the key inside and began walking off the premises, laughing at how freaked out we had been. Then, the exit door creaked open behind us. A tall figure stepped out, dressed in a black robe and wearing a bloody pig mask. At first, we assumed he was one of the haunted house actors staying in character. But as we walked further, he followed. We turned onto the sidewalk. So did he. Guys?" Logan whispered. "That dude is following us." We all turned around at the same time. The pig-masked figure froze in place, standing completely still, just watching. We kept walking, so did he. "Maybe he just wants the key," Damien suggested. "Hey, we don't have it. We dropped it in the bin." The figure didn't respond. At first, we laughed it off. Maybe it was part of the act. As a joke, we started jogging to see if he would chase us. He did. We stopped. He stopped. We stood still. So did he. At first, it was funny, maybe even thrilling. But after a while, the tension shifted. This wasn't a joke anymore. "He's been following us for 5 blocks, Marcus muttered. "If this is some kind of prank, it's gone way too far." We were approaching Damien's house and debated whether we should lead this guy there. "I don't want this freak knowing where I live," Damien whispered. We decided to cut through the backyard instead. As we reached the gate, Marcus quickly swung it open, and we all rushed inside, slamming it shut behind us. Silence. Then the gate creaked open. He was inside the backyard, and now he was walking faster. "That's it, I'm done," Damien growled. He turned and sprinted toward the back door, yanking it open. "Dad, get your gun!" The masked man froze. He tilted his head slightly, as if processing the words. He tilted his head slightly, as if prehistoric, and as if in India. "It's a red flag. Don't go there. You can die." "Put on gaiters." Damien's father, a huge man, stormed outside, pistol in hand. The pig-masked figure threw his hands up in surrender. "Whoa! Don't shoot," he stammered. "I swear, I'm only 27. Damien's father cocked the gun. "Then you're old enough to know better. Get lost." The masked man hesitated for a second, then bolted. We watched as he disappeared down the street, his black robe flapping behind him. Damien's dad sighed and lowered the gun. What the hell was that all about? We had no idea. The next morning, still shaken from the experience, we decided to contact the haunted house attraction. The response we got chilled us to the bone. They had no employee wearing a pig mask. Even now, years later, I still wonder, who was that guy? Was it a prank gone too far? Or was it something much, much worse? I don't think I ever want to find out.